So maybe we can check on the lines on the.
If anybody's online, can you tell us if the audio is working?
Can you guys unmute and say, are you hearing?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Good.
Yes.
Okay, very good. So we'll get started. We are very lucky today. We have Professor Ramesh Raskar from MIT, and he's the leading researcher in this area. He does work in interface of computer vision, sensors, healthcare, and AI. So he has won lots of awards, including the research initiation award from DARPA, the SIGGRAPH Technical Achievement Award, and also big award from Simon Foundation, and also some other awards from MIT Technology Review, and many more. So we are very happy to have him here to talk about his research. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shah. This is what an honor to be here. I'm a big fan of Professor Shah's work for many years since I was a grad student, and to be here and presenting is a wonderful opportunity. So I thought what I will do today is give you some of the opportunities that are emerging in computer vision, not just because of algorithms, but also because of other emerging technologies like sensors and machine learning. So feel free to stop and ask questions. So our group is called Camera Culture at MIT Media Lab, and our goal is to make the invisible visible, hidden objects, that are inside us and around, right? Like inside the body, around us, and beyond. So one of the original projects for us is, can you build a camera that can see around corners beyond line of sight? So if the camera is outside, you won't be able to see inside. Or how can you see through fog as if it's a bright sunny day? And how can you also make invisible data visible? Because in many sectors, including computer vision or digital health and so on, the data remains siloed. So unless you can aggregate all the data, you won't be able to do it. I mean, the reason why big companies are able to do it is because they can centralize the data. But what about folks like us? How can we play the same game by collecting it? So again, very proud of a lot of our team members. I'm not listing all the names, but some really great work. So go to this website to follow our group. So it's a video we created about 12 years ago about light in slow motion. Right? So if you take a bullet of light, a tiny a laser pulse, and send it through a Coke bottle, can you see light in slow motion? Right. So here, the laser pulse goes to the bottle, it hits the cap. You see this energy fronts, going, on the table, and after many picoseconds, you also see, concentration of light because of the parabolic curvature on the front of the bottle, right? And this whole video this whole phenomena takes place, in about 1 nanosecond. That's how long it takes light to travel about 1 foot. But because we have slowed it down by a factor of 10 billion, we can see it over 10 seconds, right? So this is, kind of emerging technology that's becoming available. So when we released this video about 12 years ago, people were quite excited about, wow, we have mechanisms now to see light in slow motion. If you do that, suddenly, what we mean by computer vision changes overnight, right? Because now we're seeing every photon, just like the human eye, right? So human eye is sensitive to individual photon, and we don't have a notion of a frame. So when I'm looking at the world, I don't have a notion of 30 frames per second. I'm not capturing one frame, processing it, and capturing the next frame, and so on. Your cones and rods are firing completely asynchronously based on the intensity of the photons. If a certain point has more photons, that particular cone and rod is triggering more often in very dark areas. The very few photons, your cones and rods are, triggering at a very low. So this notion for frameless imaging is something people have dreamed about for a very long time, because that would mimic, kind of a human vision or animal vision. And now we have it. So that changes the way we think about computer vision and how we exploit these capabilities. Of course, you can create beautiful art out of that. This here, it's an isochrone contours where every color stripe here is spaced 25 picoseconds apart, right? So there's like a time lapse with 25 picoseconds. So you can do a lot of interesting things. Back then, the instruments used to be like a size of 2 microwaves, one for camera, one for emitter. And it was very complex. But most of this technology now is actually available in this tiny dot on iPhone 12 and beyond, right? Of course, not all the functionality, but the basic functionality is already available for, I'm guessing, less than $20 to fill up materials. I don't know the exact cost, but I'm guessing that's what it is. So if you want to see around corners beyond line of sight, then what you do is, you shine light, on the door. That's your first bounce. It goes inside. It bounces around back to the camera, and then after third bounce, the camera. So analyzing these multiple bounces of light, you can see around corners. Right? And we're familiar with echoes of sound, right? Even if your friend is standing beyond line of sight, you can communicate with your friend because when you speak, your sound goes not only straight direction, but also bounces on walls and floors, and reaches a friend, and same on the way back, right? So we understand echoes of sound, but now we can also look at echoes of light. So again, this is slightly older work from like almost 10 years ago now. But we built this stuff back then, and you can see how it works, right? So this video was created by nature.com. So you should shine this laser pulse. It reaches a visible surface, line of sight. And then the packet of photons create spherical energy fronts. They scatter back after 3 bounces. Light comes back to the camera. But the light from the head and the shoulder and knees, mannequin, reach at a slightly different time on this. And that time resolution can be converted in minutes. So at 2 picosecond time resolution, light travels 0.6 seconds. So you can start making a lot of assumptions, just geometric assumptions about what light becomes like a problem that's similar to and when we start solving these 4 equations, we can actually start creating full 3D shapes of what's around the corner. This one was 30 by 30 centimeters, very small, and you can create 3D models. Sometimes your goal is not to create full 3D models, but a much simpler problem. Like maybe you want to, look for survivors in hazardous condition. So you can just, shine a beam, look at the reflected beam, and see if there's any motion. This, motion, the reflected beam will change, right? Or you can create an endoscope that can look deep inside the body, even if it does not have line of sight. And probably the most, identifiable is kind of avoiding collision for sort of the band by shining light to see if there's another vehicle that's, beyond the line of sight, right? But more importantly, those of you think about computer vision is that if we are able to see around corners, then many problems that we deal with, like path planning, object recognition, counting number of people, calculating motion of objects, all those problems have to be rethought because camera is not just about what you can see in front of you, but it's also what's around the corner. But obviously, the signal you get back from this around the corner are not going to be standard 2D images like you would see in an RGB video. They're going to be tomographic reconstructions. So they're going to look more like an ultrasound. It's going to be grainy. It's going to be noisy. It has this volumetric nature, but the viewpoint of it's changing continuously. So it's a slightly different format for pixel voxels or this 4D voxels, as we call them. So we need to come up with new paradigms for this type of computer vision. And also, I mean, Professor Chan and I come from classical computer vision, so we developed a lot of machinery, and now you might be using more machine learning. But the challenge with methods like this is there's no existing data set that you can use, right? And even if you did capture a data set, it may not be representative of what's out there. Like the type of reflective surfaces, is it reflecting from trees or wood or asphalt or sidewalks? I mean, it's a combinatorial explosion of types of things you have to deal with. Also, what are on the corner could be pedestrians or vehicles or dogs or birds or other trees and bushes and so on, right? So it's combinatorially large to collect such data sets. It's combinatorially large to think about, what would happen if the car is static versus the car is in motion and so on. So as you can see, over the next 10 to 12 years, just like it took a long time to go from like when LiDAR started becoming more popular, about 10 or 12 years ago, it took a long time for companies to figure out how to use LiDAR in a computer vision pipeline, like in autonomous vehicles and so on. And only now, I would say they have actually figured out how to exploit it in the last 3 or 4 years. So now we have this yet another, mechanism to capture information, which is like LiDAR, but more powerful, because LiDAR is one point at a time. And this is happening, as if it's an RGBD video of photons, but you're looking at every photon that's coming out. So now that we have this mechanism,
give you the one point or give you the whole image?
it's giving you neither, right? Because it's giving you a photon.
Just one photon.
It gives you one photon, and you have to figure out where it comes from. And then if you, like if I close my eyes and if I just hear a sound, right? Let's say I have only 1 ear, so I don't have directionality. Then I can draw a circle that says, oh, I sent light at time t=0, and I received it at time t1. So if I take, time t1 divided by speed of light, that's the radius of the point at which it could have come from. So I have this unknown of a sphere. That's all I know.
So it's captured much more than just one point.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. But the ambiguity is, the locus is along the sphere.
Yeah. And then this can be any light or it's going to be laser or
I mean, you want something that has sufficiently short duration. So usually it just ends up being a laser. Laser in direction as well as in time. Yeah, very, very short. So like 1 picosecond. So this, it's an exciting space. So would love to kind of brainstorm with you along with Yogesh and Professor Shah to see, if there's something we can do in space. So JPL, for example, is, let's see one more slide. So JPL, for example, has done a study on if you want to look at craters on the moon and you want to kind of probe them from the Earth, then it's not possible to see kind of inside the craters. So, they have designed a whole apparatus to probe the moon and be able to see inside. Also, there are a lot of applications in, aerospace where they would like to see from above, like 1 or 2 kilometers, but be able to see into caves and also look under garages and things like that. So any kind of a 3D scanning, that's not possible in aerospace. So many applications like these that many folks are interested in. But again, I think the whole computer vision stack that you have to develop on top of it, it's going to be very exciting going forward. Any questions or comments? Good.
So I read your material from 10 years ago, which I not, and
You look very young. You saw it 10 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I received the email and then
yesterday.
Yesterday.
Okay. After today, yeah.
Yeah. So the image that you showed from the corner of the guy who's walking, that's the same image from 12 years ago. So I was wondering, is there any improvement?
Yes.
In 10 years.
Yeah. Very good question. You're talking like a Java program manager. I gave you money. What happened to it?
It's starting in the fall. So I'm happy you accepted my offer.
That's good. Congratulations. No, that's a very good question. That's exactly the question the Java program manager asked me in 2015. And he said, what happened to all that money? You have a few papers. And I said, the only way you can do more is to give us even more money. And long story short, the program manager went and met my students who by now have become professors at other universities to check if this is real, it can actually be done. And then they created a $28 million program to build a camera that can see around corners. So now many, universities in US but also overseas have built their own solutions, and there has been like explosion of research in this space. Nothing compared to machine learning, of course, but there has been an explosion of its own kind in research in that space. So people have built, our team and others have built real-time systems that can work outdoors and so on. The cost of the systems is still very large. And now my team is trying to figure out how can we build something like this for less than $1,000. Hopefully over time it's under $100.
So this work is different from the work like Bill Freeman and other guys have done, right? That's a different kind.
Yeah, so they have done some amazing work on other type of signal corners. I'll show you an example of that. And they had a very clever idea of using shadows at corners of doors and so on. So the good thing about their method is that it works with an ordinary camera as long as it has good dynamic range. But the limitation is that it works in very specific scenarios where light is one location and the object is another location and there's a door and things like that. But it's a really powerful method as well. So, but overall, I think the point is that this idea of being able to see around corners is a very important aspect of going forward. And then I'll talk a little bit more about, although our group kind of started this whole craze about seeing around corners 15 years ago, that has cascaded into some other crazy problem statements that I'll share with you as well. So the same idea of photography, which is like how do you look at every photon, right? Has been used in other areas. So you can build endoscopes where you have a fiber bundle, but the fiber bundle is not ordered. Where the XY coordinate of every fiber bundle, but it's disordered, almost like imagine your fingers you don't know where they are. So you can send light from one fiber and then receive the light from other fiber. Or I'll talk a little bit about reading through a book. I'll talk a little bit about seeing through fog. I won't be talking about CT scan, but the reason why CT scan machines are so heavy is because they don't solve the alignment problem, the calibration problem. But if you would allow a flexible CAT scan machine where the X-ray sources and detectors are not completely rigid, there could be a tiny vehicle like a rickshaw, then actually you can solve that alignment problem computationally as well if you have the time flight information. And then using the same idea, you can also start looking at other types of medical imaging where if you want to kind of get a 5 micrometer resolution at 5 millimeters of more of tissue depth, that's a moonshot project. So in collaboration with Rice University and CMU and Harvard and others and Cornell, we're trying to kind of reach this region where you can go below 1 millimeter and still have sufficiently high resolution of that. So 5 micrometers is good enough to see your cells. So imagine if you can just use a device that looks like a blood pressure cuff, but be able to count white blood cells, red blood cells, and all operations like that, all tasks like that. So that's kind of the idea of cellular resolution in vivo imaging, but it runs into all kinds of problems, right? You have there's scattering of light. So even if there is a particular cell that's passing through your veins, which was closer to the surface, there's scattering, there's depth, unknown depth. You might have to use fluorescence lifetime and so on. So I won't go into the detail, but I just want to let you know that once you start thinking about capturing every photon and start thinking about its time of flight information, the world becomes very exciting. It opens up a whole new dimension. Just like going from images to video is exciting, and Yusuf is a leader in that space. Going from video to not 60 frames per second, but going to 1 trillion frames per second, allows you to look at in the universe, right? Because 1 picosecond is about 1 trillion frames per second. So this is the one that Professor Shah was talking about. Can you do this with ordinary cameras? And the idea is that in some extent you can. So if I want to kind of see around corners and have a camera and a flashlight, I can actually shine a flashlight on the visible wall. It will hit the light will scatter and hit the target object, go to another point and look at that, right? So if I take a white flashlight and my target was like in a white room was a red object, then you'll see a red bleed on the floor, right? If it's a green object, I'll see a green bleed. And that's just a an intuitive way of thinking about the fact that actually multiple masses of light gives you some information. So this is a very exciting technique. I won't go into the detail of this paper, but this requires, a training with a lot of synthetic data, and we deployed that a few years ago. Now, that was all about seeing around corners, but there are a lot of other problems as well, right? So you could have, partially occluded objects, you could have mirrors, you could have glass, and so on. If you get into the world of 3D scanning or new AR/VR experiences or autonomous vehicles, these are very annoying scenarios to solve. Partially occluded objects, glass, mirror, and so on. And if you use RGB cameras, a mirror looks just like, as if there's a portal, on this wall, and these objects are on the other side of that room, right? So pure RGB cameras cannot do as well. Same thing with glass and so on. Is it just a frame, or there's a glass in the middle here, right? So the question is, will time-of-flight cameras help you in this scenario, right? And of course, the answer is yes. So we're tackling a lot of these challenging scenarios by using time-of-flight. So I'll show you just one project and then move on. So who knows this scene? Which movie?
Is it the bed?
But it's Star Wars.
Yeah,
Yes, and it's kind of this race through the redwood forests, right? And when it came out, like late 70s, early 80s, I know I saw it when it came out. It's dramatic. Right? This shot is dramatic. Of course, it was speeded up. The shot was seen very slowly and speeded up in the movie. But even today, it's difficult for drones to fly this fast through a dense jungle, right? And one of the reasons is, what's the reason for it?
The guiding problem.
The guiding and the planning problem, right? Because if you cannot see what's ahead of you, your momentum is too fast to be able to steer through those things. So imagine if you can stay at one place and create a full 3D map of this jungle, even though you don't have line of sight, right? And the way to do that is what we did in our lab. So imagine you have a laser and a camera, and you're trying to look at this mannequin behind, but it's occluded by this object. So how can you create full 3D shape of that mannequin, right, with extremely high resolution, although you cannot see it straight? Any guesses? Actually, the idea is very simple, right? And I already gave you a hint based on Star Wars. So the idea is, what you do is you shine light. This is from the camera's point of view. You shine light on the left wall with a laser pointer that casts a shadow of the mannequin on the right wall, right, or the other way around. You shine light on the right, and so on. So here you're shining light on the left, so the shadow is appearing here, right? And if you just start looking at the shadow and you project it back to that point, then you can solve the so-called visual hull problem, which is carving away the voxels that for sure are empty. Anybody here knows about visual hull? It's kind of surprising, right? It's kind of a classic computer vision 101, but people don't cover it anymore. But this is a classic technique, and so you can use that to actually create full 3D shapes through that. So one message of this talk, if it's not obvious, is take like fundamental computer vision classes. Don't just use machine learning, because there's so many clever methods that have been developed that unless you exploit them, even if you want to use machine learning, you may have to introduce an inductive bias to exploit the underlying techniques like voxel carving and so on. Because if you just have data in, data out, you'll never get results of this quality, right? So anyway, the technique is very simple, as you saw. Shine light on the left, look at the shadows that will appear on the right. So we have kind of built the whole system around it. Again, here's more obvious, where on the left and right may not be a wall, but it could be trees and shrubs. You're going to shine light on the left. It's going to cast a shadow like an object on the right, and you're going to trace those rays, L1 to C1, L2 to C2, and see which one of them cast a shadow, which one of them don't cast a shadow. If it does cast a shadow, there must be a voxel that's blocking it. If it does not cast a shadow, then it's an empty space, and you can do this voxel carving of the earth to do that. So this is kind of a clever technique. The problem with this is that you have to scan one laser point at a time, right? And that could take a long time. And the images on the right can be captured only, whatever, 60, 100 frames per second. So it'll take a long time to do this. So how do you make it work for, a continuous scenario, as you're looking through the pilot. So I'm not going to explain that today, but look at a paper that's online where we can take multiple beams. We can shine multiple beams simultaneously, take multiple shadows, and we can recover that using geometry instruments. Yeah.
So since the technology you introduced, like taking a photo of the things that's so fast,
Right.
Will our computation power be able to catch up the speed of?
Very good question. Very good question. So, if you take a typical, iPhone camera or smartphone camera that runs up to 240 frames per second for a 12 megapixel image, if you multiply that out, that's about 20 gigabits per second. Okay, already, which is, it's if you look at the latest Qualcomm chips, it starts exceeding those specs, right? And I know when we do research, we don't think about problems like, gigabits per second and so on. I'm just like, I'm just going to capture it and process it and we'll write massive gigabit, right? Who cares? But you're asking a very important question, which is, we need to start thinking more like the human eye, where, a lot of the processing actually happens well before the V1, V2, V1, V2 processing happens well before, rest of the signal, reaches our brain, right? And if we're going to start using some really clever pre-processing, that's very close to the sensor. And the field is slowly evolving. The notion of embedded computer vision and so on has been around for some time. But I would say, Professor Shai, it hasn't really taken off as much as we want to get it out there, especially not from a computer vision point of view. It has progressed from a compression point of view, but not from a computer vision point of view. So these kind of systems actually really stress the ability of the sensors to do something meaningful. So I'll show you at the end one video from one of our startups that just came out of stealth today, where they're able to solve these problems. By simply putting processing closer to the system. All right. So to see through a book without opening page by page, you can't use visible light. You could use X-rays, but a book is completely transparent in X-ray. So it's something that's not, as you want a light frequency of light that's not optical frequency, kind of, with visible light, but also not X-ray, something in between, and that's called terahertz, right? So about 100 gigahertz of frequency. And if you do that, you can start processing all these things. The challenge with terahertz is that the book is still somewhat transparent, almost like an X-ray, but you get tiny reflections from the interface between paper, air, and ink. Just the change in refractive index gives the final reflections between these things. And then you can start processing that using standard computer vision algorithms and run OCR on top of it to start recovering things. So, you can read a book without opening it. When your parents used to say, like, the night before the exam, just put the book under your pillow, maybe you have some superpowers. You can just read the book without actually opening it, as long as it's under your pillow. Somebody said to you, like, we used to hear that all the time, like, put the book under your pillow. I think the idea probably was like the moment you wake up, you should read your class books. But maybe like they have like terahertz abilities to read the book without opening it, page by page. So again, this is another functionality which uses time of flight in the terahertz zone to recover that. So this is the time of flight information. So this is the time dimension, and this is the X dimension. So you can see these 9 pages. You can see them over time. So we should look at the first page, for example. This is the time of flight. The signal arrives, over here. But by the time it reaches the 9th page and the 10th page, the signal is very, very weak, right? So, but you can take this XYZ volume, X, Y, and time, and apply computer vision principles to recover the pages, recover the text, and so on. So it's kind of a volumetric process, just like you would do. And then when it comes to fog, can we This is an ordinary camera, and this is how you would see through fog. But here you can see much better with time of flight. So what's the technique to do that? And the idea here is that if you just write down the equation for scattering of light through fog, you'll realize that the background has a gamma distribution in time profile, and the object has a normal distribution. So, you would get the background and the signal, and if you just do the decomposition of these two different PDFs, then we can actually pick out the signal, all that's very, very good. So this is the mannequin, and this is the fog, right, as well. So there are many tricks like this you can use in the volumetric domain to record all the signals. So if you can conquer time, we can see around corners, we can see through fog, we can read through closed books, we can create new endoscopes. I didn't talk about fluorescence lifetime, but that's another project. But in the future, we can go well beyond. I mean, if you're doing satellite imaging, if you're doing microscopic imaging, can you see multiple kilometers away, with high resolution? And that's simply a function of how big is your aperture. Your diffraction is, a lot of systems are diffraction limited, which is, doesn't matter how many pixels you have, the optical bandwidth is limited by the size of the aperture. It's called numerical aperture. So, but if you have time of flight, you can actually beat that. So you might have very tiny lenses and still be able to get very good resolution. You can deal with ambient light by taking a picture only within 1 picosecond. The sun is not as bright as you would think. In 1 trillionth of a second, the sun doesn't bother you, but your light source can be bright enough in that particular window. Or we can create negative light by using, destructive interference, and so on. Okay. So any questions so far? Yeah.
It's me again.
I'm the only one. Good. Otherwise, I'm going to start picking people.
So for a book reading application, I only see that you use non-overlap scenario, but in real book, we have the pages that overlap with the letter. How do we handle those problems? Because we might read multiple pages at the same time, and then we have the overlap.
Very good question. So actually, we don't have significant overlap. So your main point, just to be sure everybody understands, is that the text from page 1 would interfere with text from page 2 and so on.
Yeah.
So this example does have that interference, which you should see carefully.
Oh.
And but in real world, it will be even more dense. This was a little bit, we kept some distance like between each pages. Real world is even more dense. So you need this iterative removal of sources, and it's a nonlinear effect because the signal from the second page is impacted by signal from the first page, and so on. So actually, mathematically, a very interesting problem to solve. And our group solved some of the fundamental problems, and some other groups are focusing on like the problems we're talking about, illusions and partial illusions. Yes.
And then are you using a single frequency or multiple frequencies?
So terahertz works on something called like a chirp frequency. So you sweep through the frequencies. And are you familiar with optical coherence tomography or like human radar? They all work with this idea of a chirp frequency. That means they change the frequency very rapidly over a small window. So it will go from, it's like 8 gigahertz, it will go from like 7.9 gigahertz to 8.1 gigahertz, and to sweep through that, and that gives this very beautiful property that the depth gets converted into phase information. So those are the standards. It's called FMCW. So most of the LiDAR, not most, but many LiDARs are coming up nowadays, use this idea of chirp frequency. Chirp simply means all frequencies that you're cycling through in a linear fashion. So 7.9, 7.91, 7.92, 8, 8.1. 8.01, 8.02, up to 8.1.
So coming back to like this question,
Yeah.
that was like different side of the page, right?
Right.
What if like the things are like touching each other from?
Oh yes, just a good question actually. So we didn't do that, but it's a valid question. So Yogesh's question is, what if there's text on both sides? So the way to think about this is a page is usually 25 micrometers. The ink is about 5 micrometers. And the gap could be anywhere between 0 to 25 micrometers. If you buy a brand new book, like, then the gap between pages is extremely tiny. But if you opened it, then the gap increases. And so think about the scenario. We have 5 micrometer of ink, 25 micrometer of the page, and then hopefully, like, let's say of the order of 10 micrometer is an air gap. And when the light comes in, it reflects from the ink, reflects from the paper, goes to the paper, reflects from the air. And each of them have a slightly different refractive index. So if you're looking at glass, for example, The glass is transparent, but you can still see your own reflection. And the reason for that is the two surfaces of the glass have like you have air, glass and air, out there. And because of Fresnel reflection, about 4% of the light actually comes back. So in a typical glass, if it's not coated with kind of reflective coating, 4% of light actually comes back. That's why you see your own reflection, right? But if you turn on the light on the other side, and this room is too bright, and you won't see your own reflection because 4% of yourself is not as strong as 96% of what's behind, right? So basically you use this Fresnel reflection trick. And when it comes to the ink on the other side, it's not a problem at all because as long as the resolution is of the order of 5 micrometer to the thickness of ink, you're perfectly fine.
So in general, because you are able to capture all those things so fast that you will be able to distinguish the thickness and where it's coming from to identify is there only other
more than fast, just to be sure you have the resolution to resolve something with a depth difference of only 5 micrometers. Like a typical time-of-flight camera or a stereo camera, if you use it in this room, might have resolution of, I don't know, 5 millimeters or centimeter. But with these techniques, your depth resolution is 5 micrometers.
Okay.
All right. So I'm going to just talk very briefly about single photon cameras. It's kind of a really interesting development over the last few years. So everything I showed you so far requires, heavy instrumentation to recover every photon. But as I said, now your smartphone, at least iPhone has it. I'm sure Samsung has it on the way. So in the next couple of years, you'll have the single photon sensors available in your pocket. Okay, and hopefully for your research, and hopefully on every satellite, hopefully on every microscope, hopefully every surveillance camera, and so on. Right. So this is a really amazing emerging technology. And unlike thermal IR cameras and SWOT cameras, which are exciting but always remain expensive, these cameras just use standard CMOS technology. So they'll be of the order of same as your standard CMOS cameras that you have in your smartphones and everywhere else. And the key idea there is, you can capture every photon, right? Every light particle. And if you just send a light pulse, you can just measure how long it took. And as long as you can capture every photon, you got the distance to the object, right? That's straightforward. So this idea of using a time-of-flight information is being used in many setups like LiDARs, Kinects, AR/VR headset. And
so just distinguish from the standard camera, you capture lots of photons.
That's right. Yeah, in a standard camera, let's say you have an iPhone, smartphone camera, that's you're running at 60 frames per second. So you have 16 milliseconds to accumulate as many photons as you can. In those 16 milliseconds, you will capture thousands of photons. And then at the end of 16 milliseconds, just stop. And the pixel that received more photons is a bright pixel. A pixel that received less photons is considered a dim pixel. That's it, right? But there's a lot happening within the 60 milliseconds. You're getting thousands of photons, and it would be nice if you can capture every photon. And going back to your point, if you start capturing every photon, then unfortunately you're back, and let's say you report every photon that's coming in, saying, oh, I received this photon at millisecond time 12.003. And if you keep all that information, it will be terabytes of streaming data that's coming on the other end of your phone. So it's very, very challenging. So the only difference between a standard RGB CMOS camera and this CMOS camera is that they report at once every 1/60th of a second. This is reporting at every time there is a photon.
And you're keeping record of all the photons you send.
XY location and the times.
So that way you can generate also high resolution.
So you can do many things.
So
I'll show you some examples of that, but you can do many things. So this is something that people already understand. So if you're using a self-driving car, then there's a laser beam that aims at the street, and then within a few nanoseconds the light comes back to this single photon detector. It's called a single photon avalanche diode, and that's it. Imagine that the LiDAR is spinning very fast, right? So you send the pulse, the photon comes back, and it's recorded, And by now, the motor has already moved in the next direction. But because the whole thing is happening within a few nanoseconds at the speed of light, you can capture it even before it has moved on, right? And so on. So it's doing it all the time. It's firing, right? And capture that. But this is kind of a dumb way to do it, honestly, right? Because you have to have this spinning instruments, mechanically spinning instruments. And what you would like to do is actually just take a 2D camera, like a standard atomic camera, and send light and then capture all the photons coming at that pixel. So that was not available till recently, but now it's.
But LiDAR, there's a problem also. You are not very sparse representation.
Very sparse because it's a mechanical system, right? So you're usually getting 1 or 2 samples per degree, as opposed to a standard camera which is getting about 100 samples per degree. Right. So that's the difference. Because if you have 30 degrees, you're getting 3,000 pixels. So there are already a lot of systems that work on time of flight principle. But then if you have the single photon sensors, you start getting some really interesting effects. So first of all, if it's LiDAR, as I said, at some point you just get the peaks. And this is where the object must be. This is where the street is, this is where the pedestrian is, this is where the bike is, this is where the next car is, and so on. If you do fluorescent microscopy, you get a nice PK over time. If you're scattering media, then you might get the first peak, but you still have a decay. But then if you're seeing around corners, like I described earlier, then you're going to get some peak from the first bounce, from second bounce, third bounce, and so on. You have to make some sense out of this stuff as well, right? But then, it kind of this whole revolution of single photon sensors has been coming around for the last 5 to 10 years. But this stuff is still very, very expensive and only like science grade. It's not becoming available at commercial grade, but that's changing now. And this is actually it's collaboration with Mohit Gupta, who's a professor now, associate professor. He got his tenure already. This is a video he sent me where these single photon sensors, the video of that looks like this, right? Because a random photon arriving at a random time, and then if you accumulate all these frames, then you would actually see the real image. Okay?
So these are the guys got a base paper award and CCC or
it might be different. Maybe 3 years ago.
No, last year it was one group from Wisconsin. They were doing some.
It's possible. It's possible. Yeah, it's possible. I haven't traveled to see it or sometimes. And now that these things are becoming very commercial grade, not so cheap, but hopefully cheap enough. There's a spin-off from our group called Ubisoft, and they literally came out still this week. I just sent a video to Professor Shah this morning, and they can process every photon. So here's a nice video, and I know a lot of you like to work on video understanding. So on the left, one of the best low light cameras, sold by Sony, and you see vehicles moving very fast. And here is the USEP solution, right? Single photon sensor. Yeah.
Videos on there.
I just wait a minute. See. That doesn't work. I can just the video here and show it here. Yes, you can see it here. Right. So as you can see on the left, it's nearly impossible at nighttime to look at license plate because clearly, although the camera is more light sensitive, the way it's achieving that is by keeping the exposure time on for longer duration. So any motion like that, especially at nighttime, it's impossible to see, the license plate here, right? But for this one, you don't really care. You're capturing every photon that's coming from the scene. So you can, although the previous video you saw, which was like a salt and pepper noise type video, you can combine all those frames and start creating videos that look like this, right? Completely at a commercial grade solution. Okay. And depending on your application, in this case, it's OCR or character recognition. But go to this website and you'll see some other videos as well. They're just showing like initial proof of concept of what this can do.
So how long does it take to get that kind of image?
It's real time.
Real time.
It's real time. Yeah. You can. I think they have a feed where you can just they're streaming it live on YouTube.
So how does the FPS compare to, for example, if there's 30 FPS, that should be much higher.
So the equivalent would be about 100,000 frames per second. But again, like I said, like we don't look at the world by clicking frame by frame. You should really think about how many giga photons you're capturing, as opposed to how many thousands of frames per second. But the equivalent of that is somewhere between 10 to 100,000 frames per second. And then you can slow it down as much as you want, down to every photon, and you will get the grainy video that I showed you. Or you can convert it to some meaningful number of frames. And this is a choice that you can decide. Like, oh, for this scene, maybe I want 10,000 frames per second. And for this scene, I think 30 frames per second is fine. If I'm looking at this room, 30 frames per second is fine. I think it's going fast.
So that's like for each location, but still you have that spatial context, right?
Right.
So at each location, when you're getting the photon, it's like 10,000 photons per second.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But then you can't just take the raw frames and average them because you'll get a blurred video. So you have to do, classic, CVML methods that allow you to understand what the motion is and compute the motion vectors and understand what the objects might be in the scene, and then do the photon integration and so on, which is exactly what our human eye does. Like if I move in this room, there's certain things that get blurred, but certain things remain very sharp, right? And that's because I have decided a priori based on kind of my pre-perception that, hey, I'm moving and I shouldn't simply let everything blur, And you might have done this exercise if they're like a spinning fan and you're looking at it. If you just kind of follow the blades of the fan, you can actually see the fans, individual blade moving very smoothly, right? That's because you have kind of deliberately said, oh, the way I'm going to look at this picture is not by staring at it in a static way, but I'm going to follow what really matters. And you have some intelligence that says the scene I'm looking at is actually a fan with 3 blades. I'm going to kind of focus on that, right? Same thing if you're looking outside the window and there's a car moving, and you can kind of track it with your gaze and make sure it doesn't get blurred. But if you're not looking carefully, just looking at the street, then the cars will go by and you won't be able to, recognize words. So all those decisions we're taking as humans, we take the decision first, and then we get an image. But here you record those, trillions of photons, in your buffer, and you can decide, how to use them, how to run computer vision on it, how to merge them, and so on. So in this case, if you scroll down, it's doing real time.
This is like commercially available, this camera?
From this company.
And it's going to be expensive, very expensive.
In the beginning it'll be expensive, but it shouldn't be more than $300 down the line. Their R&D costs probably cost you in the beginning, but the sensor itself should not be. So that's why it's not like a thermal IR sensor or a LiDAR and so on, which it has never come down in cost after all these years.
The thermal needs cooling and so on.
Exactly.
So does it work? It doesn't work at night, right? It's not that like the investment for night, like iron.
Yeah, but what is night anyway? Right? Like if the scene is not changing, anybody who does photography for astronomy, like looking at the sky and so on, right? You can just take your standard SLR camera, actually, even your a Google Pixel, and if you just let it record for a second, you can see everything beautiful, even in pitch dark, right? And that's because there's no such thing as pitch complete darkness. There are enough photons, it's just that our eyes are not sensitive enough. But if you record for 1 second, 4 seconds, you'll see it. And what these sensors are doing is basically saying, oh, yeah, okay, I'm just going to capture every photon. And if there are enough photons, I can actually form an image. And even if I cannot form an image for that's as good as for photography, it's good enough to do computer vision tasks. Counting, motion, recognition, classification, and so on. So that's like a new format for representing photons at those pixels. With pixels, we have made a decision to make it a discrete X, Y, and time, and that comes up. That comes with the costs.
So this is what they put a lot of this in this guy. See, now also they do. That's a different direction.
So they're also working on things like this.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Butulakos and they're doing some really good work in this space as well. So this is an amazing trend that's coming up, and I think this notion of computer photography being able to exploit every photon is going to play a very big role in the next few years. So think about doing aerospace imaging, from aerial, fish dark, like marine surveillance in complete darkness, or using it for I would love to create pictures from satellite of the Earth at night. Right? Because only every picture you see on Google Maps or anywhere are daytime satellite pictures, but not nighttime satellite pictures, right? And so on.
Yeah, so in this case, that captures all the photons. The normal one captures two photons. Let's suppose we have two cameras.
Right.
One capture this, one capture all the photons. And the other one capturing some photons. Can you go in reverse order, like from those less number of photons, you can reconstruct all of them? Right now, AI generative modeling is
Yeah.
so can you go in reverse order?
You mean like from a standard camera go here?
Yeah, I mean,
You can hallucinate, but you cannot hallucinate the exact license plate number. You'll get some license plate number, but you won't get license plate number that you carry, right? So hallucination is great. We have done that, anytime you add a regularizer, anytime you add priors, you get something that's believable, but it may not be exactly. Is that the question?
Recently, you've seen a lot of AI generative modeling, reconstruction.
Yeah.
And people have the model able to learn from some other thing. So I was just
Yeah, it's perfectly fine. You don't even need image on the left. You can just type text. You can see a whole video.
Train from this to this.
Yeah. And I think I'm old enough to say that, and I have this argument with my students all the time, which is there's this desire to do like data in, data out, and impatience to actually understand what's happening in between. And if you keep doing that route, not only your algorithm is not interpretable, but you yourself will be not interpretable. You won't be able to interpret what you're thinking, what you're saying. So I highly discourage you from going in this data in, data out type problems, and try to really kind of immerse yourself and see what's the problem I'm really working on, what's the task at hand, what's all the information I can capture, what are all the classical methods that could solve it before I start using other priors. And once that's all done, then start using the power of data-driven methods to take it forward. But if you can create end-to-end differentiable systems where you're actually using the physics or modeling or underlying transportation of light, then you'll do much better than you just select, what? I'll just use the latest generative AI or some similar methods together. So definitely avoid data in, data out blocks. All right, so to conclude, we want to make the invisible visible. I talked about kind of inside our bodies, around us and beyond. I didn't get time to talk as much about our machine learning projects, but they're online as well. The top row of projects, actually, we think of them as kind of decentralized computer vision, decentralized AI, decentralized society. And we're using a lot of ideas from Web3, not cryptocurrencies and NFT, but Web3, which is decentralization for this problems. I won't have time to talk about it today, but if you're interested in if you're kind of a little bit annoyed that your friends in other parts of computer science are working on cryptography and so on, and people in computer vision don't get to play with it. I think this is a really amazing fusion of computer vision and decentralization. So take a look at that. Thank you.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
So yeah, thank you for the great talk. Very interesting technology.